Welcome back to Cosmic Comics. Beginning with Captain Mar-Vell, Volume 1, Issue number 37. Published in 1975, we have a 10-issue run written by Steve Englehart, with most issues being co-written by Al Milgrom. Captain Mar-Vell, Volume 1, Issue number 33, marks the beginning of a 13-issue run without any guest appearances in other comics, the longest stretch since Marvel's initial run. Let's take a look at what these two new writers do with an iconic character and lots of room to write. The issue begins with Mar-Vell thanking Hank Pym for him and his wife Janet saving Mar-Vell from the living laser of the Lunatic Legion. But instead of the real living laser, they were beset upon by a robot version made of plastic and metal. Hank wants to know what the Lunatic Legion is and is hoping that Mar-Vell can tell him. Mar-Vell doesn't know much, only that the living laser has attacked Rick Jones twice. Hank looks surprised that Mar-Vell doesn't know that they come from the moon. He goes on to explain how Luna is Roman for moon. But before Hank can dive too deep into his explanation, Janet flies up with something they pulled from the living laser's corpse. What she's carrying is a rock from the blue area of the moon. Janet and Hank know that it's from the moon because they tested it against NASA samples, but the chunk of rock found on the living laser didn't come from NASA's collection. Plus, NASA samples would have been rocks, and that's it. The sample the Pyms found is work, polished stone that can act as a power source. Hank attempts to fill Mar-Vell in on some more details, but it's too late. Mar-Vell is already gone. At least this time, he takes the time to say thanks on his way out. Rick seems upset at Mar-Vell's sudden departure, and here we address the ever-growing conflict between Rick and Mar-Vell. Rick is worried that Mar-Vell is going to go to the moon. Mar-Vell, on the other hand, sees it as a foregone conclusion. Of course they're going to the moon. And, oh boy. Man, I'm gonna have to unpack Rick's reply. Rick, a white man, says to Mar-Vell, a pink Kree, "What do you mean, we, white man?" Okay, look, I can see why Rick may refer to Mar-Vell as white, but Mar-Vell's people are a minority group on his planet. Mar-Vell is served under commanding officers that have used pink Kree soldiers as fodder for the front lines of battle because of their pink pigment. So, for Rick, a white teen idol pop star, to use a phrase most commonly associated with Native Americans to refer to another racial minority seemingly hits almost every single mark of tone deafness and a little bit of racism. Rick has had at least 2 attempts on his life. Following this, his best friend and superhero buddy wants to investigate those attempts, and Rick's response is, "I can't get caught up in something like that now." Dude, they already made 2 attempts on your life. I think you're already caught up in it. Instead, Rick is concerned with getting his music career back on track. Rick claims to have gotten suckered into his upcoming trip to Denver with Mordecai and co-star Dandy. Rick didn't know he would be performing as a duet, but he certainly didn't get suckered into the tour. Rick signed a contract. In fact, Mordecai was kind enough not to hold Rick to the first contract the two of them had together, which Rick broke. Rick Jones thinks that because he's no longer an Avenger, he deserves to be a teen idol. Deserves. And, man, tone down the privilege, Rick. At this point, I wish Rick would just drown in his own ego, because I'm done with him. Mar-Vell, ever the gentleman, kindly points out that it was he who encouraged Rick to meet back up with Mordecai, and that Rick isn't due in Denver for another 5 days. Oddly, Mar-Vell assumes that Rick doesn't need any time to practice before taking his show on the road, and frames the debate in terms of looking after Rick's career or their lives. But seriously, that's what's up, and Rick knows it. And this panel with his hanging head, it shows it. Rick asks Mordecai if it's alright if they meet up in a few days, and Mordecai is ready to roll with the punches. He shakes Rick's hand and lets him know that he'll use Rick's mysterious disappearance as an excuse to drum up some press. Dandy gives Rick a hug goodbye, letting him know that she started to like having him around. As she leans in close, she gives him a present in case his personal thing gets boring. Rick looks surprised, and Dandy lets him know she's just giving him a little vitamin C. As Rick walks off, Mordecai informs him that if he doesn't show up, he's going to break Rick's arm, but Rick's attention is focused on his vitamin C pill that Dandy gave him. Rick doesn't get far before Mar-Vell chimes in, wanting to know about the benefits of vitamin C. At first, Rick just tries to put Mar-Vell off, pretending like it really is vitamin C, and that Dandy was just being a pal because he's been feeling under the weather. Mar-Vell, forgetting that he and Rick have only recently left the hospital, says he hadn't noticed. Now, Rick is starting to get upset. He wants Mar-Vell to leave him alone and complains about never getting any privacy. Mar-Vell apologizes for the intrusion and explains that as time goes on, that he feels that the symbiotic link between them is growing their minds closer and closer together. Mar-Vell is just now truly getting to know Rick. This creeps Rick out, who tells Mar-Vell that he doesn't want them to know each other in that way. Mar-Vell seems hurt, but Rick Jones stands his ground. Rick makes one thing clear. He doesn't like being attached to Mar-Vell, and he doesn't want anybody looking over his shoulder. Wow, that sad face on Captain Mar-Vell says it all. This explosion is an extension of what we keep seeing from Rick. He has an emotional outburst of some sort because he's sick of being stuck with Mar-Vell, and Mar-Vell is left to talk Rick down. Once again, Mar-Vell pleads with Rick that the only way to fix their current situation is cooperation. Mar-Vell, who in the past has complained about the surveillance of his commanding officers while acting as a soldier, offers to make an attempt to respect Rick's privacy moving forward. Then, the protector of the universe asks for permission to fly to the moon. Rick acquiesces, admitting that Mar-Vell is right, but Rick Jones isn't happy about it. Hey, here's something I like. Writers who recognize the limitations of their characters' abilities. In order to get to the moon, Mar-Vell will need to fly there. Mar-Vell implies that his flight speed is somewhere just over 7 miles per second, meaning it will take him 10 hours to fly to the moon. With that in mind, Mar-Vell is planning on flying there himself and notes that he will need to turn back into Rick Jones 3 times before arriving. To prepare for their journey, Mar-Vell and Rick stop by Avengers Mansion. Upon their arrival, Jarvis informs Rick that only Wanda is home at the moment and she doesn't want to be disturbed. Rick waltzes right in, informing Jarvis that he's here to borrow a spacesuit. Like you do. While Rick locates and puts on the spacesuit, he starts having a change of heart. Rick starts thinking about how cool his life is and how lucky he is, and that as long as he and Captain Mar-Vell are stuck together, he might as well make the most of it. Before taking off to the moon, we get a runway shot of Rocky Jones, Space Ranger. Mar-Vell takes off towards the moon. He warns Rick to settle in. It's going to take most of Mar-Vell's concentration to use the negabands at top speed as thrust devices in space. As he's leaving the atmosphere, Mar-Vell loops around all over the place for reasons unknown, and we see another figure behind Mar-Vell. As Mar-Vell makes it into space, he's struck, caught completely off guard. He even gives a humorous, "What in holla?" We are introduced to another member of the Lunatic Legion, or one that they hired. I don't know, there's a weird line in there. This is the 3rd member that Mar-Vell has fought, and this one is here to get his revenge for Mar-Vell besting members Nitro and Living Laser. For unknown reasons, the Legion is still after Rick Jones. The aggressor introduces himself as Nimrod the Hunter. He shoots one blast at Mar-Vell, while Mar-Vell plays it off like it doesn't matter what Nimrod's powers are. Thanks to Mar-Vell's finely honed cosmic awareness, he easily catches Nimrod off guard. Mar-Vell's cosmic awareness is picked up on one other fact. His prey isn't human. It's a robot, just like the last rendition of the living laser. And in the process, he blows that robot up. As Mar-Vell flies away, he points out that both Nitro and Laser were still alive, whereas this one is 100% robot. Mar-Vell assumes they use a full robot model this far out into space because nothing living could maintain a vigil out here. After this recent attempt on the duo's lives, Mar-Vell stresses once more the importance of investigating the moon. Rick, decked out in his space gear, agrees. Rick starts to get settled in for the nearly 3-hour wait, regretting not bringing his guitar. It seems as though the writers forgot that time passes much slower in the negative zone, with the equivalent of 1 Earth hour being the equivalent of 2 weeks in the negative zone. Rick should be settling in for a trip that will feel to him as though it takes just shy of 5 months. Yeah. Before he can settle in, trouble looms over his shoulder. Annihilus draws closer, and we can see that he still has the damage done to him, the holes in his wings from Mar-Vell's positive photonic energy, which trails behind him as he flies. Rick is ready to settle in for the trip when Annihilus calls out to him. Instinctively, Rick turns and strikes out, aided by the Iron Man exoskeleton found within the Stark Industries spacesuit he wears. Annihilus seemingly breaks apart before his blow. Rick then makes a strange and trippy discovery. Annihilus is made up of thousands of tiny Annihiluses. Each of these tiny Annihiluses forms a collective intelligence that represents Annihilus as a whole. This explains so much. Annihilus is literally just thousands of kids inside of one trench coat. This is so bizarre, but appropriately alien. Annihilus lets us know that this attack worked only because he is already weakened from Captain Mar-Vell's previous attack. Rick tells Annihilus to bug off before turning his attention back towards Mar-Vell. Rick notices that Mar-Vell, having to use all of his focus on the journey, is completely out of Rick's head for the moment, and for the first time in months, Rick Jones feels he has some time to himself. While floating in the negative zone, Rick complains about not having his guitar for the 3rd time this issue. Bored and with a 3-hour wait ahead of him, Rick pulls out the vitamin C pill and pops it into his mouth. We aren't shown any immediate effects as it switches back to Mar-Vell. And Mar-Vell seemingly makes his trip to the moon in one go. How odd to make a big deal out of Mar-Vell and Rick needing to swap places 3 times and then never bother to bring it up or show it during the journey. Mar-Vell flies over the blue area of the moon. For more on its history, check out my video on first contact between the Kree and Skrull. The city Mar-Vell's people built is little more than ruins now. Mar-Vell's senses tell him that everything here is empty except for an alien construct on the far rim. Mar-Vell recognizes this as the home of the Watcher. Mar-Vell takes off towards this abode, hoping the Watcher can tell him about anybody else here. Mar-Vell loses his footing in some lunar dust, the first signs of things to come. Mar-Vell even takes the time to remark that he's walked on alien worlds for decades and has increased reflexes thanks to Eon. Mar-Vell is having a hard time concentrating as he notices a growing tingling in his jaw. In a central panel offset from the other two, we see Rick Jones, presumably falling down the rabbit hole of the drug he took. And in a funny turn of events, Mar-Vell thinks he might be getting sick and considers if he should have taken Rick's vitamin C. It's at this moment that Mar-Vell realizes that he can no longer feel Rick's thoughts. Instead, Mar-Vell is overtaken by another sensation, as pulsing waves begin pushing through his head. As this feeling increases, we see a distressed Rick Jones, who appears to be sweating, and then crying from inside of the negative zone. Captain Mar-Vell and Rick Jones? Yeah, they're on a trip. An acid trip. Rick Jones is transported to the world of his youth, his home, dog, and parents, all taking form in front of him in the negative zone. Mar-Vell, on the other hand, has walked into a cavernous room filled with a wild array of machinations. A voice calls out, telling Mar-Vell that he knew he would come forth to confront him. Then the Watcher reveals himself. At once, he admits to allying himself with Mar-Vell's recent foes, the attacks from the Lunatic Legion. The Watcher looks angry and apologizes for what's to come. He has to murder Captain Mar-Vell. So much for non-interference? Got to love the narration in the bottom of the panel. Take a captain from the finest core of warriors in the universe and temper him with tragedy, tribulation, and transformation. Even now, he'll be hard to kill. Upon hearing these words, Mar-Vell kicks the Watcher right across the face, resulting in a solid tunk. But the Watcher can give as good as he can take and tosses Mar-Vell across the room. Our hero does an acrobatic roll to land on his feet. He then rips apart some of the Watcher's machinery and hurls it at him, landing square on his forehead with a harsh crack. But all the Watcher can say is, pitiful. He had expected more from Captain Mar-Vell. As the giant head of the Watcher leans in, Mar-Vell finds himself locked in place. He knows somehow that it must be Rick's doing. Rick calls out an apology. No longer fully aware of his surroundings, Mar-Vell takes off to find a place to regroup. After flying for some time, all the while being incapable of telling what is real and what is not, hearing no sounds of pursuit, Mar-Vell lands, lungs laboring for breath as Mar-Vell looks around the closest corner. As he takes a moment to wipe the sweat off his brow, a giant hand reaches out for Mar-Vell, and like a child picking up a doll, the Watcher has Mar-Vell in his grasp. Still going on about how he expected so much more from Mar-Vell, but then he sees it. Mar-Vell is ill. The Watcher is unwilling to give Mar-Vell death while he is less than whole. So he's going to give Mar-Vell a fate more permanent than death. He's going to give him to oblivion. As the Watcher rides a transport device through his chamber, he carries Mar-Vell in his arms, and he bemoans the fact that he has lost all self-respect and honor. Instead of watching, he's felt the constant need to act and act and act and act, and each action has led him to having to act again to cover his previous misdeed. The Watcher arrives at his destination and places Mar-Vell on an altar or bed, and the Watcher is placing Mar-Vell right before the Lunatic Legion. And all the answers to your questions, they're promised in the next issue of Captain Mar-Vell, in the Trial of the Watcher. But it takes a little bit longer than that. Before moving on to the next issue, let's not look past the balls on Englehart and Milgram for having Rick Jones drop acid in their very first issue together. And on that note, before I move on to the next issue, there is a continuity problem I would like to address. Rick and Mar-Vell are supposed to exist in a state of stasis while in the negative zone. This is presumably why Rick never needs to take a poop while he is there, and why the deadly nerve gas, Compound 13, didn't kill Mar-Vell right away. His body was being held in stasis as long as it was in the negative zone. The same rules should have applied when Rick ate the vitamin C. The drug should have no effect until Rick spent some time in the positive zone. I could see the writers getting away with this if it was later in the run, but the whole bit about them being in stasis was a major plot point in the previous story arc. Finally, this picture reveals the Lunatic Legion, but good luck making out who any of them are from this. Issue number 38 opens with Mar-Vell under control of the Lunatic Legion, and instead of being a bunch of white-skinned supervillains, the likes of which have been after Rick Jones, surprise, they are instead a bunch of blue-skinned Kree. The only one of these characters that would be familiar to the reader is former Kree Prime Minister Zarek. The other Kree that he is convinced to join him are Admiral Sro-Him and warriors Arjai Ush, Kay Sadie, Fair Por, and Tone Bill. The Kree of Mar-Vell attach to a rather elaborate setup and are aware that Mar-Vell's mind has been distorted. They want him to know that he's on Earth's moon with no way out. Admiral Sro-Him really gets into it, shouting that Mar-Vell must be told why. Of note is the naughty and guilty-looking Watcher watching over his shoulder in the background. He knows what he's done. Deposed Prime Minister Zarek leans in and tells Mar-Vell that his death sentence begins with a fairy tale. Zarek then gives a synopsized version of the early history of the Kree and the Skrulls. I've already covered that at the link above. A few takeaways from this are that the building of the Blue City on the moon is marked as Year Zero on Kree calendars. We also see that Zarek believes that the only reason that the Kotati won is that they bribed the Skrulls. And the dishonest Skrulls? Well, they accepted the bribe. After that day, the Kree began expanding out into space. The Kree soon began interbreeding as part of their conquest, and this diluted the bloodlines of the full blue-blooded Kree, as will later be established with the character of Hulkling. To be considered Kree, one's father must be Kree. The problem is now there are very few full-blooded Kree remaining. A fraction of those that remain left the Kree Empire to reclaim the lost city on the moon, to reclaim their forgotten heritage. And once they got set up, of course their first order of business was, we need to kill any non-blue Kree in the area. And Captain Mar-Vell, being pink-skinned, or as he's called here, a mulatto with paranormal powers, well, they knew he wouldn't put up with them setting up shop so close to Earth, so yeah, they just had to kill Mar-Vell. No other choice. In order to do this, they sent forth their Lunatic Legion, but I thought they were the Lunatic Legion. I'm confused. So the Lunatic Legion was sent forth to destroy Mar-Vell, but we all saw how that went. Once the Kree arrived on the moon, they were surprised to discover not only did the Watcher welcome them, he gave them aid. Zarek finishes fitting Mar-Vell's helmet on his head. He wants Mar-Vell to reflect on why the Watcher broke his oath. Not only did the Watcher allow them to strike at Mar-Vell from his home, but he actively raised his hands against Mar-Vell in a physical confrontation. Zarek wants Mar-Vell to reflect on this conundrum during the final moments of his life. As the Lunatic Legion cheers on their victory, the Watcher, who has but one job, for once, cannot bear to watch. He turns his back as Mar-Vell undergoes the Kree rite of protonic disintegration. Not much of a rite one would want to take part in. For the past 900 years, it's been the official mode of execution for the Kree Empire, destroying both mind and body so that brain patterns can never reassemble for reincarnation. But the writers pull out a familiar trick. Mar-Vell and Rick Jones swap places. The Lunatic Legion are forced to halt the process, as it has no effect on humans. Zarek laments that their time must have run out, as Mar-Vell can only remain in the positive zone for a maximum of 3 hours. Zarek orders his band of Kree to take Rick Jones to security until they find a way to bring Mar-Vell back from the negative zone. Meanwhile, over in the negative zone, Mar-Vell, he's having a hard time of it. He is still tripping pretty hard, and he's completely unfamiliar with his surroundings. He's stuck, floating helplessly through a void of unreality and hallucination. Then, Mar-Vell has what I can only consider a hallucinogenic epiphany. It brings up his mortal parents and his cosmic awareness, but it doesn't really provide any answers as to how Mar-Vell actually rights the proverbial ship that is his mind. The hallucination begins to wane and awareness begins to reassert itself. Although other Kree would have been stuck basking in the drug's afterglow, Mar-Vell once again becomes himself. It's odd that as they give Mar-Vell more agency, his face slides further into the cosmos. Mar-Vell becomes aware of Rick Jones and the Lunatic Legion carrying him. For the first time, Mar-Vell is capable of controlling Rick Jones' body, just as Rick Jones was capable of controlling Mar-Vell when he was incapacitated. Mar-Vell slams Rick's wrists together, swapping places once more. Mar-Vell seemingly takes down all 4 Kree soldiers with some kind of crazy super move. It looks like he kicks one with each leg, while simultaneously hitting 2 of them with his fist. Mar-Vell oddly seems unaware that it was he that brought Rick's wrists together, as he remarks to himself that Rick shouldn't have been able to bring his wrists together. Zarek is prepared to resume protonic disintegration upon Captain Mar-Vell, but Admiral Srohim interjects, pointing out that their peers, well, they would have preferred to kill Mar-Vell themselves instead of witnessing an execution. Zarek agrees to the proposal. Mar-Vell is still having a hard time figuring out what is going on as 4 Kree warriors rise to meet him and are given the command to crush him where he stands. Once Mar-Vell leaps into action, he's shocked to discover that he's stronger and quicker than ever before, but this realization cost him in the short run as it allows the Kree to grab him and get in a solid punch to his backside. But Mar-Vell quickly adapts to these new circumstances thanks to his cosmic awareness and starts laying on the hurt. Mar-Vell begins to catch on to what is happening. The drug that Rick took left Mar-Vell's mind more flexible than before. Mar-Vell's thoughts became more fluid, while at the same time becoming more aware than ever of the second consciousness trapped within his own mind. Wow. Mar-Vell Comics, it seems, are praising the positive effects of an acid trip. Captain Mar-Vell starts thinking so fast that the rest of the world feels like it's moving in slow motion. Whatever happened with this drug, Mar-Vell realizes that he and Rick have become more than the same person, a combined person. They have become more than the sum of their parts. As Mar-Vell continues battling, Rick Jones begins to wake up in the negative zone. Only instead of opening his eyes, he begins to work in tandem with Mar-Vell, their consciousness working as one. When Rick Jones finally opens his eyes, he sees both the negative zone and Mar-Vell at the same time. At first, this is shocking to him. He reaches out to Mar-Vell in an attempt to figure out what is going on, and Mar-Vell places the blame squarely on Rick. Their entwined minds is a byproduct of the vitamin C Rick took. Due to the barriers that have been broken down between Mar-Vell and Rick, Rick can no longer hide his drug use. Mar-Vell points out that it was Rick who, back on Earth, complained that their minds were becoming too intermeshed, but now it's Rick who completes their union. Way to call him out, Mar-Vell. As Mar-Vell continues to pummel the Kree, Zarek belittles Srohim's performance. Admiral Srohim snaps back that, like any good military man, he has a plan. All the while, Mar-Vell appears to be landing 3 blows at once. Rick speaks to Mar-Vell, letting him know that he sees how their minds have slowly been becoming more intermeshed over time. Srohim notices that Mar-Vell is distracted and calls out to Zarek to use this moment to strike. Meanwhile, Rick wants to tell Mar-Vell about animating his body, but Mar-Vell discovers that Rick doesn't need to. Mar-Vell is capable of pulling the memory straight from Rick's mind. Along with this memory, Mar-Vell also sees that Rick was contacted by the Supreme-Intelligence, who told Rick that Rick was responsible for Mar-Vell and Rick's intermeshed minds. Rick knows he should have shared all of this with Mar-Vell, but before the conversation can continue, Zarek and Shro-Him strike. So, this was the strategic plan from the great military mind. Wait until the hero is distracted, and then dive in. I'll give them credit for this. They grab Mar-Vell's wrist and force his wrists together. Nobody else has done this, and amazingly, it works. The Kree have Rick Jones. Shro-Him brags that it was his idea to go after Rick. Rick, on the other hand, attempts to be a tough guy, threatening to attack with his bionic supersuit. Zarek, he laughs this off, pointing out that Shro-Him, he's also wearing one. Rick attempts a different approach and name drops the Supreme-Intelligence, claiming to be good friends with him. Maybe a good idea with some Kree, but not these. Zarek lets Rick know how he feels about the Supreme-Intelligence, calling it a cesspool of impure minds whom they would never inform of their plans. Zarek goes on to explain that it was the Supreme-Intelligence liberal policies which led to the formation of the Lunatic Legion. Zarek lets Rick know that any friend of the Supreme-Intelligence is as good as dead. Zarek rears his arm back and prepares to start punching Rick. In the negative zone, Mar-Vell can see what's happening. Mar-Vell calls out to Rick and tells him to concentrate with every fiber of his being. Somehow, they both know that the two of them no longer need the negabands to swap places. The swap is complete. Mar-Vell and Rick are now one. As Zarek brings his fist forward, Mar-Vell moves his head to the left, causing Zarek to punch Shro-Him. As they do so, Mar-Vell exclaims that all barriers between him and Rick have been broken. Mar-Vell realizes that he was capable of controlling Rick's unconsciousness earlier when he raised Rick's arms to swap places. When Mar-Vell learned that he and Rick were capable of doing the same thing, he knew that even more incredible possibilities might exist if they were both awake. Rick agrees, and now that he and Mar-Vell's minds are so closely linked, he no longer feels that he can be mad at Mar-Vell. In fact, Rick sees this as a good thing, a new beginning. Mar-Vell congratulates Rick for being so mature about this change of events. All the while, Mar-Vell has been punching away at Zarek and Shro-Him. One final punch on Zarek sends him bursting through a wall. As he does so, Rick comments that Mar-Vell appears to have picked up some of his cockiness. A defeated Zarek curses Mar-Vell and refuses to be defeated by a pink Kree. As he rises to the floor, the Watcher returns and Zarek calls out, asking for assistance once more, requesting that the Watcher help kill Mar-Vell. Again Zarek calls out, but the Watcher doesn't move. Mar-Vell, the Protector, punches his enemy in the back of the head and tells him to shut up. The Watcher looks pleased and turns, walking towards his machines. As he does so, Mar-Vell wonders if the Watcher is really his enemy. Mar-Vell gives chase, wondering aloud, his memory addled from the drugs, about a Watcher who would allow a conflict within his home. The Watcher tells Mar-Vell that he's done far more than allowed a fight in his house, and that for one such as him to do anything is a crime beyond reckoning. As Mar-Vell lands, the Watcher pulls forth a large gun. The Watcher lets Mar-Vell know that he has but one recourse to cap his disgraceful life. Mar-Vell is left wondering which of the two of them the Watcher plans on shooting. The Watcher pushes a trigger on the gun. Afterwards, great skeins of raveling energy tangle the air above the Watcher's head, constantly growing more violent until the form of the Watcher resembles a giant torch. As the inferno reaches a crescendo, the Watcher speaks, "I am unworthy." Following these words, the sparkling atoms pulse 3 times in unison before leaving. From the depths of space comes a response. 2 other Watchers arrive and tell him to stand with them in the teleportation beam so that they can complete his final judgment, an order our Watcher is happy to obey. Before leaving, The Watcher turns to Mar-Vell and asks him to pardon his actions against him while asking for forgiveness. Mar-Vell isn't given any real chance to respond before the Watcher claims it doesn't matter. He knows what he's done, and he knows why he did it. He says his last goodbye. As the transportation beam prepares to leave, Rick calls out to Mar-Vell, telling him to give chase. Mar-Vell wants to know, what about Denver? Rick points out Denver is still 4 days away. He wants Mar-Vell in that beam. Mar-Vell dashes into it, and in the next instant, there is nothing around Mar-Vell but a roaring stream of light and warmth and nothing else. And here we are, Mar-Vell fans, issue number 39, The Trial of the Watcher. In seemingly seconds, Mar-Vell has traveled light years within the beam of light he hitched a ride on. The light gives way to the greenery of a jungle just like any other world, but this isn't any other world. This is the home of the Watchers, the Watchers' world. As the Watchers arrive on their home planet, one calls out, "Love of Igor!" When he sees that they have been followed by Mar-Vell, one of the Watchers calls for Mar-Vell to stand still and prepare to be sent back. No one, not of the Watcher race, may remain on their planet. But Mar-Vell calls back, "No." The Watcher seems dumbfounded by the response, as if he's never been told no before. Mar-Vell explains that if there is going to be a trial, he wants to speak on the defense. The Watcher in question, he spared Mar-Vell's life twice. Finally, we learn the name of these two Watchers, Atul and Ingu, who concur that if they send him away, he will attempt to return. So they agree to put him into stasis where Mar-Vell will float until the trial is completed. As for the Earth's Watcher, Uatu, he's being blamed for a Kree man coming to their planet, but Uatu doesn't deny it. He has already proclaimed himself unworthy. Odd, in the next panel, the Watcher states that no human, not even Mar-Vell, could escape the shroud of stasis, only because they have taken such care to call him a Kree man up to this point, so why start calling him a human now? And the Kree are stronger than humans, so that's not even a very good point of reference. With Mar-Vell in stasis, the Watchers are ready to continue. The Watchers then use the power of their minds to transform themselves into energy and leave. Not sure what it means, but what a great quote. "By the unholy secretions of Kralax." And here comes Rick to start complaining about their current situation, despite the fact that it was Rick who told Mar-Vell to jump in behind the Watcher. Mar-Vell attempts to explain that he was like a child before them, but soon realizes that Rick knows exactly how he feels, because the two of them are so closely interconnected now. The two of them also agree that for whatever reason, switching places won't help them this time. It doesn't take long before fortune smiles upon Mar-Vell. Aaron, a young Watcher, and you have to love this flavor text. Though his cranial development lacks yet years of full maturity, he considers himself quite bright. Comes plodding along. The conversation between Rick and Mar-Vell continues. The two of them have proven that they no longer need to use the negabands to swap places. Mar-Vell proposes that he and Rick may be capable of pulling apart from one another physically. Here in the land of the Watchers, where all is peaceful, a rat cat watches the transformation unfold. Captain Mar-Vell and Rick Jones concentrate on pulling apart two minds that have become one. The end result is a simultaneous explosion and implosion of light, but no sound. Two beings witness the transformation take place. Aaron the Watcher and the Rat Cat. Rick Jones is ecstatic to be free. Almost too much so, but Mar-Vell appears to share the sentiment, noting that their lives are their own once more. Rick is carrying on about how excited he is, and when he suddenly falls over, or at least it looks like he falls over, although I don't think he fell over. So now we look back to the Rat Cat, whose name is Mad Eye, an odd name for a creature that we've been told has grown up in a life of peace. Anyway, Mad Eye is upset by the bright burst of light, and one man becoming two. The beast has grown angry and attacks. Mar-Vell strikes at the beast while Aaron watches. Mar-Vell calls for Rick to get back while he holds the beast off. Rick agrees that his exoskeleton, it's not built for close combat, and runs away. I love the detail of seeing the Rat Cat leaping towards Mar-Vell in the background. Mar-Vell is impressed by the maturity Rick learned from sharing minds, but quickly turns his attention back to the fight, leaping off Mad Eye's head. The Rat Cat strikes back with his claws, but misses. Mar-Vell doesn't want to kill the beast, but recognizes the possibility as he lifts a boulder over his head and hurls it at his attacker. It connects with a loud tonk. Elsewhere on the planet, in a canyon at the edge of a broad and glassy glade, Uatu stands alone before the others of his kind. He calls out to those gathered, "Fellow Watchers, I have summoned you from the far ends of the universe to sit in judgment of my wrongs, for I have transgressed upon our most sacred law." Uatu then shares an interesting tidbit. The Watchers wouldn't interfere. It was Uatu's duty to summon them, and his duty to produce the Temple of Justice. Uatu grabs each end of the metallic wafer firmly and pulls on each end. From it bursts forth a lattice of light which begins filling out and taking a solid form. As all of this takes place, the Watchers begin shuffling forward. One would have thought that a giant boulder to the jaw would have been enough to end the battle between Mar-Vell and Mad Eye, but no. The Rat Cat's antlers begin to glow. Mar-Vell is afraid of what might happen next and decides he needs to knock the beast out while he can. Thus, he comes in with a two-handed blow to the creature's head. The blow manages to knock the beast out without killing it. Rick steps out of the jungle and ends up stroking his own ego as much as Mar-Vell's. Mar-Vell doesn't let it slide, pointing out that Rick has gotten them into unnecessary trouble more than once. As Mar-Vell lifts Rick off the ground and takes towards the sky, he admits that, well, Rick's mischief eventually led to the two of them being free from one another. I think he means drug use, not mischief. The two of them fly off together in search of the Watcher's trial. Back on the ground, Mad Eyes wakes up. Unfortunately, these cats are capable of holding a grudge, and it leaves in search of its prey. The Watcher Aaron follows. Mar-Vell and Rick don't have to look far before locating the trial. Less than a mile away, they see the lattice of light on the horizon. Rick and Mar-Vell walk right up to the edge of the dancing lights, and Mar-Vell decides to lead the way, walking through it. And wow! Those three panels are part of a much larger spread here. A gathering of Watchers, the likes of which is seldom seen. And I would love to know more about those three figures who are represented by the giant statues on the right-hand side of the panel, especially the woman with the hair. Rick and Mar-Vell have inadvertently run upon the main stage of the trial. Uatu turns and in shock calls out, "Mar-Vell and the boy!" Rick Jones, known for his snappy one-liners, should have had a better comeback ready than, "That's Mr. Boy to you, sir," without having any idea what's going on, unless maybe he gets it through cosmic awareness somehow. Mar-Vell again demands to be allowed to speak in Uatu's defense, claiming to have personal knowledge of his actions. You have to respect the response. So do many of us, the Watcher recants, noting that the Watchers watch themselves. He points a finger at Mar-Vell, claiming that he has no right to interfere. And considering that Mar-Vell isn't a Watcher, this isn't his home planet, and he seemingly has no knowledge of how their culture works, I happen to agree. Mar-Vell needs to back off. The Watcher immediately recants, noting that the force of stasis didn't work and that they won't use any force against Mar-Vell, so they don't have any option but to let him stay. They even acquiesce, allowing Mar-Vell to speak in Uatu's defense as long as he takes the time to be instructed in their code. Which, really isn't that much. Ages ago, the Watchers perfected immortality. Uatu's father declared it the Watcher's duty to aid those less unfortunate. Imnu, the Watcher speaking to Mar-Vell, opposed this generosity for selfish reasons. In the end, Imnu was outvoted, and the Watchers traveled to another planet where they passed on the gift of atomic power, so that that species could use it for the greater good. To heat their homes and cure the sick, but as soon as the Watchers left, the species used the power for weapons and blew themselves up. The Watchers returned pretending to be gods. Even though Imnu had wanted not to interfere for the wrong reasons, he felt justified that his initial decision was the right one. Witnessing what they had done, the Watchers all swore to never again interfere with others. Despite them all taking that oath, Uatu has interfered repeatedly. So let's cover real quick every time the Watcher Uatu has interfered in Mar-Vell Comics up to this point. Some are mentioned in this issue, while others have been left out. And for the sake of brevity, I think every single comic I'm mentioning here is a Volume 1. Uatu the Watcher first interfered in Fantastic Four, issue number 13, when he broke up a fight between the Thing, Red Ghost, and the Super Apes, interfering again when he brought the Fantastic Four to the blue area of the moon, and again when he transported Red Ghost through time in an effort to chase him out of his house. In Fantastic Four issue number 20, the Watcher creates havoc on the streets of New York when he decides to send a blue flaming orb to transport the Fantastic Four to the moon in order to warn them about the Molecule Man. In Fantastic Four issue number 29, the Watcher gives the Fantastic Four safe passage from the moon back to Earth. Imnu takes a moment to point out that the Watcher appears to have had a bias towards the Fantastic Four. In Avengers Issue 14, we see Uatu leaving the Earth when Wasp is wounded to watch a massive space battle as two ancient enemies dive into a final confrontation. But who can blame him, as the space battle is obviously the bigger of the two events, and Wanda is recovered from surgery by the very next panel after the Watcher leaves. In Strange Tales, issue number 134, the Watcher arrives to warn the Thing and Human Torch about Kang poking about during the days of Camelot. Again, he visits the Fantastic Four in Fantastic Four Annual number 3, where he allows Reed Richards to borrow some tech in order to stop Doctor Doom from ruining Reed and Susan's wedding day. In Tales to Astonish, issues 73 through 75, Leader sends Hulk to the planet of the Watchers to retrieve the Ultimate Machine. While there, Hulk is shown the Watcher's collection of plants, animals, and mechanical life, all kept under domes for observation. This behavior is more what we would expect from the Collector or the Stranger than what we typically associate with the Watcher. While there, Hulk fights against a creature from a different galaxy who has arrived to steal the same piece of equipment as the Hulk. As the battle rages, the Watcher eventually sends the other combatant back to his planet, preventing Hulk from killing him. He then hands over the technology Hulk seeks. Later, when Hulk finally puts on the ultimate weapon, the Watcher uses a device to amplify Rick Jones calling for help, forcing the Hulk to hear Rick. The Hulk then leaves the device behind, and the Watcher recovers it. The Watcher shows up repeatedly during the Galactus trilogy, Fantastic Four issues 48 through 50. First, he makes the entirety of the sky of the Earth look as though it's on fire. He then fills the atmosphere with space debris, both in an attempt to divert the Silver Surfer away from the Earth. When Galactus does show up, the Watcher attempts to talk him into leaving. Uatu is eventually the one who saves the day by sending the Human Torch to fetch the ultimate nullifier, and then allows Reed Richards to threaten Galactus with it. Uatu returns 10 issues later in Fantastic Four issue number 60. Here we see the Watcher stay his hand in a battle between Doom and the Thing, where he notes that with a gesture he could give aid, but laments that he has interfered too many times in the past. 1 year later, the Watcher returns in Fantastic Four issue number 72 to warn the Fantastic Four that the Silver Surfer is going to attack mankind. Mnu does give Uatu some credit, noting that after warning the Fantastic Four about the Silver Surfer, that he managed to stay somewhat aloof. Adam Warlock, when he was still known as him, had a run-in with the Watcher in Thor, issue number 165, when him was nearly killed by a space trap the Watcher had set up to study meteors. Mnu actually gives Uatu praise for saying nothing when he rescued the being known as him, and for returning him to Earth, the planet from which he fled. The Watcher returns in Fantastic Four issues 113 through 116, beginning by warning the Fantastic Four about the coming of the Overmind, and again when he tells them the Overmind's origins and history. He then sticks around after the battle is done to ensure the Fantastic Four have learned the proper lessons from their tribulation. The Watcher arrives in the pages of the Avengers, but again, not to warn the Avengers about anything, but instead to enlist the help of Leonard Tippett, a man who has an uncanny history of being average, never being a loser nor a winner. This is due to Leonard being a focal element, a convergent point in time. Imagine time in the Marvel Universe as a tree with the timelines of the past stretching down and spreading out as the roots, and the limbs up above towards the possible futures. Focal elements such as Leonard are the trunks of these trees. The Watcher then tells Leonard he has to kill 5 specific people in order to stop a war which will cut across all the timelines, destroying all life in the future. The Watcher transforms Leonard, giving him the power to kill his 5 targets, while at the same time, the Watcher is guiding Tony Stark's hand to help him create a mentality regressor helmet to subdue Leonard. As if that wasn't enough interference, the third act twist is, those 5 people, they never needed to die. The Watcher told Leonard that because he knew it would cause the Avengers to respond. Between all of the killing of people and fighting off of Avengers, it ended up being enough to accomplish the Watcher's goal, to capture Leonard Tippett, because it turns out that Leonard is the cause of those wars that the Watcher warned him about. In order to protect reality, the Watcher then takes Leonard and locks him outside of space and time. In the Avengers, issue number 118, Dormammu, making a power play, requests that the Watcher refrain from interfering when he arrives to watch the action. Uatu agrees to only observe and record, or as he says, "I will not molest you." He hangs around after the battle to explain the Avengers the after effects of the battle, including that of Dormammu's energy being shoved through Loki's mind, reducing his mental state to that of an infant. The Watcher shows up next in Giant Size Fantastic Four issue number 2, where Uatu warns the Fantastic Four that while they were off-planet running a spacecraft test flight, the Earth was reverted to a previous time, a primordial state. Uatu then sends the Fantastic Four on a mission through time to set things right. Mnu wraps everything up by accusing the Watcher of raising his fist against Mar-Vell, conduct unbecoming of a Watcher. A mighty voice calls out, "Wait!" from below. Mar-Vell steps in, pointing out the Watcher's interference has always been in order to aid the Earth, never to hurt it, with one exception, when the Watcher attacked Mar-Vell. Mar-Vell then tries to pass it off as maybe the Watcher was protecting his home from a drug-addled superhero, and as he speaks, we see Mad-Eye is just outside the bright lights. Mar-Vell wants to know what the big deal is, that the Watcher occasionally shows his anger, or that he likes being friends with the Fantastic Four. So what? Mar-Vell asks that Mnu examine their code. He thinks that they made a mistake. As he says this, Mad-Eye approaches, with Aaron behind him. The Rat Cat then enters the proceedings as Mar-Vell attempts to explain that the universe could use more Watchers following Uatu's example. The cat, with its antlers charged, attacks Mar-Vell. Rick Jones calls for Mar-Vell to look out. This time, the beast gets Mar-Vell with its antlers charged, and Mar-Vell feels his nervous system short-circuit from the attack. The young Watcher, Aaron, technically interferes by telling Mar-Vell that a single blow from a rat cat's horns are not fatal, implying that a second one will be. He also comments that Mar-Vell is strong for a human, despite not being a human. What gives here with the Watchers switching back and forth between calling Mar-Vell a Kree man and a human? Mnu wants to know why the youth Aaron has entered the temple. Aaron explains that he was following the man in red, who is perhaps unique to watch. But this isn't entirely true, as Aaron wasn't following the man in red, he was following Mad-Eye, who was following the man in red. Rick points out that last attack, the shock, really put a hurt on Mar-Vell. He calls for the Watcher to help his friend. Rick points out that Mar-Vell, he stood up for Uatu, but Uatu, standing before the gaze of his peers, says to Rick with a heavy face, "I am sorry. I will not." Rick is shocked by the response, telling him that has to be the lowest thing he's ever heard. Unexpectedly, Aaron offers to help the man in red, and Rick calls for him to go get it. Mnu calls out for Aaron to halt. This is not how we live. Aaron retorts that Mar-Vell, he doesn't deserve to die. Mnu, losing his mind at this point, screams back, "Who are you to know?" Rick Jones, tired of listening to the Watchers argue back and forth while Mar-Vell needs help, decides he has to take matters into his own hands. Rick charges in, bemoaning that he and Mar-Vell can't seemingly get 1 hour of quiet now that the two of them are separate. Rick jumps in, attempting to avoid the antlers on the front of the beast. Rick grabs Mad-Eye by the throat in a chokehold. Mar-Vell calls out for Rick to stop, but Rick reminds him that he's wearing one of Tony Stark's exoskeletons, claiming that he can hardly feel the energy. All the same, Mar-Vell demands that Rick let go now. But Rick refuses. He won't let go until he knows that his buddy Mar-Vell is safe. And then we get perhaps the strangest clinging together of the Nagabands, as Mar-Vell clings them together on both sides of Mad-Eye's skull. Afterwards, Rick, again, is more interested in taking half the credit for the fight, while Mar-Vell is focused on the task at hand, noting that he didn't expect such danger here. Mar-Vell then turns to speak directly to the gathered Watchers, using what just took place to prove his point. Unless they consider his life a bad thing, Rick's interference has added to the greater good by prolonging Mar-Vell's life. But this is where I think Mar-Vell might be wrong. Most of the Watchers would most likely be indifferent to Mar-Vell's life. They've seen planets come and go, universes form and then crumble. What is one life to them? Mar-Vell continues, if the Watchers were to occasionally act, they could save incalculable lives. Mar-Vell might have been on a roll for a minute, but then he takes things too far by pointing out on Earth, the Watchers could provide humans with new energy systems, turn their deserts fertile, and show them that they are not alone. This comes across as really tone-deaf and bad form on Mar-Vell's part. The Watchers shared their history, their people's story with Mar-Vell earlier, so that he might understand their point of view, and Mar-Vell completely ignores all of that by asking them to repeat the exact same mistake that led to them taking their oaths in the first place. Mar-Vell straight up asks them to provide new energy systems. Imnu doesn't have a good response to counter what Mar-Vell says. Mar-Vell is pointing out that if the Watchers wanted, they could still help the universe move towards a greater good. And Imnu's response is to ask what of the paranoia, helplessness, and rebellion their actions would lead to. But those don't seem like such big problems when we're talking about in return is the end to starvation and disease. Imnu points out that Mar-Vell's love of action has inspired action in young Watcher Aaron. Imnu continues, action breeds reaction, which breeds reaction, which breeds reaction, and no action is worth anything. And this is very similar to the Watcher earlier in this arc who was talking about how one act bred another act, bred another act. And Imnu eventually gets around to what I was saying a moment ago with all the things that are happening in the universe and the multiverse. Mar-Vell's life is seen as neither good nor bad, merely true. Imnu isn't concerned with the good or the bad, only the truth of what takes place. By taking action, Imnu is convinced that he must ally himself with a position, which may stop him from seeing the truths that oppose his position. Not just interfering, but merely taking a position is enough to stop the Watchers from knowing the truth. Imnu turns to Uatu, whom he asks if he agrees. Uatu concurs that Imnu is correct. But then Uatu turns toward the crowd of Watchers as he continues. As he looked out onto the world, he saw billions and billions of stories unfolding, and Uatu wanted to get involved. So he did. He aided heroes and marked their important events. It made Uatu feel good. It made him feel like a hero. At the same time, Uatu was bothered that he refused to do more for those that he watched. When Mar-Vell became protector of the universe, a life that really Uatu longed for, he allowed Mar-Vell's enemies into his house and join them in opposing Mar-Vell. I can only assume opposing him means murder. Each succeeding action from that point onward led Uatu further into disgrace. I love how it's that led him into disgrace and not all of the series of actions that he did for years leading up to that point. He claims to have learned his lesson and that it will not happen again. Wow, let's also back up to this other big revelation here. Uatu was attempting to kill Mar-Vell because he was jealous that Mar-Vell became protector of the universe. Amazing. Imnu reaches forth a hand and places it upon Uatu's shoulder and simply says, "It is good." And that's it. It's over. Rick seems shocked. Huh? No punishment? He just says he'll be good and they believe him? Mar-Vell points out that after all, he is a Watcher. Outside of the obvious conundrum of getting these two back to Earth, that wraps up the Trial of the Watcher. There is so much to love in this story, but at the same time, I can't help but feel that this wraps up way too quick. It does show why Mar-Vell's testimony wasn't needed. As long as the Watcher admits that he did wrong and agrees not to do it again, he's free to return to his post. We aren't shown what happens if the Watcher wants to continue to interfere. The best thing to come from this new writing team is, even if it's only a very short period of time, Mar-Vell and Rick are finally separated from each other. I also like them showing that Zarek and other Kree purists are still out there plotting against the Supreme-Intelligence. And finally, it was cool to get so many Watchers in one place and to learn more of their names. Other than a minor continuity issue on the stasis and the drug affecting Rick Jones, the new writers seem to be off to a great start. In the next issue and episode, Mar-Vell has to fight his dead love Una for, I think, the second or third time in the series, and Rick Jones learns that the vibe in American culture has changed since the last time he took the stage. Thanks for watching Cosmic Comics. Feel free to hit any of the buttons below. I'm out.